Don Rice, Jeff Woody, Scott Abell, at the time, were all Seminole District coaches, head coaches, Brookville, Jefferson Forest, Amherst, respectively. They have since moved on to other avenues, but hey, I think this could still be relevant. How did they view the media? Let's hear their take on the Sports Buffet podcast, originally aired on Talking High School Sports, so let's call it a Sports Buffet Classic. In the summer of 2006, we had a Talking High School Sports Roundtable. Now we'll feature it on the Sports Buffet. The topic on this edition is media. How can the media improve their coverage? Are they fair, and so forth? And we sat down with three of the best in high school football in the Seminole District to discuss the topic. Scott Abell of Amherst County, Don Rice at Jefferson Forest, and Jeff Woody at Brookville. Let's hear from three of the best in the business in high school football. Coach Rice, Coach Woody, Coach Abell, on this edition of the Sports Buffet. Back here with some of the finest minds in education and football. Scott Abell, weight training at Amherst, also the head football coach. Jeff Woody, head football coach and the best history teacher Brookville can find. All good history teachers at Brookville. Let me preface that. Don Rice, weight training, PE, health, probably does a little bit of everything at JF because I know what they ask of you out there. Coach Abell, is there anything the media could do to better themselves?
Well, I guess in our business, we always would like to see as much exposure for our sport as possible. But I think in general, since Virginia does a great job of covering high school sports, but, you always want to see more. I mean, that's just the human nature. I think high school sports are a great thing, no matter, whether it's baseball in the spring or football in the fall, that, it's a once-in-a-lifetime deal that kids go through. And as much exposure as we could get with newspapers and TV coverages and radio shows, I think the more the better for the kids.
Yeah, I agree. I think Friday Football Extra, when that show started, it started 2 years after I was out of high school, and that's done so much because the other, channels followed suit, and it did a lot for everything. I think the one thing is, as coaches, and we talked about this earlier, young coaches, is sometimes you have to watch what you say so you don't get things taken out of context. And the point being is, last year I said we were getting ready to play Pulaski, and I said, going up to Pulaski is a different world, because I said that everybody comes out of the woods to come to the game. That's what they do. The place closed down. It's like Giles and other places. They close it down. I said, you want that to be forced. You want everybody to be at the game. And the next day in the paper it said something like, people they live in the woods and that's all they do in Pulaski. It's not what I said. It's not what I meant. And the people in Pulaski knew they didn't offend them at all. They knew exactly what I meant. But I think sometimes you just make sure when you think about what you're saying, just don't especially after a game or loss, just don't come off the cuff and say something that you really didn't want to say.
I'll take that into consideration, Don. I won't say that anybody lives in the woods when I'm talking to a newspaper reporter. But as far as Lynchburg is concerned, I think they do a great job with the newspapers on Friday. I know I look forward to seeing what you guys have going on. Same with you at Amherst. So Fridays, all the kids have the papers, the coaches have the papers. We're checking it out. Friday night, I know that they do. On the radio, they do broadcast a couple of ball games. I kind of would like for us to have that opportunity as well. I think some of those people who are working the late shifts and can't make the ball game, possibly check it out. And then with your show on Saturday, and also Friday night, you have Friday Football Extra, which is what my staff and I, we get together after and we get everything situated at the school and we check out Friday Football Extra. And so if you want it, there is a market out there. You could always check something out as far as high school football is concerned.
How careful does the media have to be? Because in the sports center age we live in, where all highlights and every anchor tries to be a little bit funny, how careful do they have to be of, you want to try to be funny maybe with a highlight, but at the same time in high school you're risking it embarrassing the kid rather than in the pros. If somebody makes $6 or $7 million, if they get a little pile on their face, they can have a $4 million towel to wipe it off.
They do need to be careful, obviously, because you're talking about 16, 17-year-old kids and sometimes younger. Sometimes what might be said in the newspaper or what might be said after a highlight may be taken out of text, as with Don's comment about people in the woods, which, we all know that's not what he meant. But you never know what somebody who lives on the back road somewhere might take that quote. So, you never know how a mom, a dad, a grandparent is going to see that highlight and how they're going to understand what the commentator has to say about it. And so I do think the media needs to be careful with the high school kids. They need to treat them just a little bit different than they maybe would a college highlight or a professional highlight.
Now, you had the Salem incident last year, which I know you probably want to forget big time, but did the media overblow that? Because even months and weeks later, I remember WDBJ showed like 3 or 4 of the worst calls in high school football history, and I think after talking to Mike Stevens, they were trying to point out this official is human. Other people have made just as bad mistakes.
I guess since we were on the short end of the stick, I didn't think it was overblown, the coverage. But, I'm sure Salem did, and I'm sure the young man who made the catch, I'm sure his family got sick of hearing of it, and I'm sure they got sick of seeing the highlight. And, because it was a great catch. The kid made a great catch. He just happened to be out of bounds. It's not his fault. He didn't plan for it to all happen. But I guess one thing I've said numerous times to people about that whole situation that I think I was most proud of with our team and our coaches and is the way we handled the situation. It didn't become a circus act out there. And if it had the TV stations would have focused on us and the circus act and how we reacted to the call instead of the call itself. So I think I'm most thankful that because we handled the situation the way we did, there was coverage about the call, which you rarely see in high school sports. We all experience bad calls, but you rarely see it taken to that extreme as far as where it is really under the microscope looked at. And, I think we will all agree, since we're talking about media and we're talking about that being blown up, you don't see the interviews of officials after games. We all get interviewed. We all get questioned. Officials never do. They never get questioned. They never get interviewed. They call the game. They go home. They forget about the game. They line up and do the next game the next Friday. I think for the first time, the official association down there, they had to look at something. I think their officials had to look at something, and they probably had to live with this all off season just as I did. And my players had to live with this all off season. So, I think for that I am thankful. I wish I could say, we live and we forget and we forgive, but I think I'm thankful that the official association down there and probably that one official is probably still thinking about it as we are being reminded of it all the time.
Any comments from you guys regarding that situation?
Yeah, I'll make a comment. I do agree with the Amherst fans and especially the coaching staff and the players responding, with class and what they did in response to that blown call. But I will say I was scared for my life in one situation in the stands. I was watching that game. I was in Salem, Coach Abell, and after that play call was made, there was a guy behind me that went off, and I had to sneak out and get away from him. So there was one guy in Amherst that was a little bit wide open.
I imagine it was more than one. I imagine it was more than one fan as they left there that night.
There was some feedback in the news in advance about that was less than favorable, I guess.
Well, there was, and believe it or not, one of the editorials was actually written by a Forrest person who actually, I think his kids go to LCA, to be honest. So there was a lot of reaction. We got emails from other states. There was on some highlight show down in North Carolina, they showed the play. And so some coach from North Carolina emailed me, say, hey, we saw the play, we started to see what happened to your season, good luck next year. And you do get sick of talking about it, and you are ready to move on.
I think that's the most hits the WDBJ website got, too, because it was on the website, and Mike Stevens told me there was unbelievable traffic just looking at that call. There was, and, the whole Virginia Preps message board, that they were deleting pages.
Yeah.
It just overwhelmed them.
And I didn't go on the Virginia Preps and look at it. I didn't want to see all the comments. And, I had staff members, hey, did you see this? Did you see that? And, I just stopped looking.
I think, Scott, the best point was made here was that the Roanoke Valley officials had to police themselves a little bit. Like Scott said, they don't get interviewed, they don't get questioned, they make bad calls. But I think what it did is, and this is my opinion, is shed light on the fact that there are certain places in the state that they get. There's a certain thing as home field advantage, and Salem's one of them. I'll be honest and say it. It used to be you got to see. I remember seeing Jeff play in high school. I mean, they get calls, and it was the same referees there all the time. And I think it shed light that they realized that we can't send these four. They get in the habit of doing the same thing. So I think that's a good thing. Bad on on Scott for what happened, but I think in the whole long range thing it'll be a good thing. So I think the officials will say, look, we got to really police that because we got a bad eye.
Well, I got to give you credit because I don't get to see any highlight shows before I tape my show on Friday nights and do interviews. And I called you, and I had no idea what happened. You were as classy as anybody, win or loss. So I think that's a great testament to you.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
We'll do another roundtable soon with these three guys: Jeff Woody, Don Rice, Scott Abell. Gentlemen, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
No problem.